This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I was reading about a product which has a bit of a dodgy power supply, and it was the Yamaha Magicstomp. No, actually, funny enough, it was the Quad Cortex. Now, the Quad Cortex is about 2 decades senior to the Yamaha Magicstomp, but there are some interesting, I thought, slightly interesting things. So both of them have a bit of a clumsy power supply, right? This one can do reverse delay. This cannot. This can do multi-tap delays. This one cannot. Now, what this made me think was, perhaps, I think what this has also got 24-bit processing. This had 32. I'm kind of thinking, like, are companies, not just Neural DSP, for example, like the Helix didn't get polyphonic pitch processing until 2020, the end of 2020. Are companies sort of exaggerating the leaps forward that technology is taking? Because although we get told, is it Hooke's law? It's not Hooke's law, that's elasticity. The law, the computing law, Judge Dredd. Processing power takes big leaps forward, or fairly big leaps forward, but I think these units, although they may use the latest chips and stuff, don't necessarily make huge leaps beyond what was possible almost 2 decades ago. In some ways. In other ways, I think they do. But it's interesting to think, so this guy was talking about maybe Neural DSP have sort of missold the unit in some ways, or misrepresented what it would be capable of, because it was essentially sold on the idea that in future updates would make more stuff possible. And I think we have seen there have been some meaningful updates. You know, there's a looper in there now. There are more amp models. Still no desktop editor. Still not possible to load plugins into it, which would have been one of the main things which would have made it a bit of a game changer, being able to run the Neural DSP plugins, which are very well received, into the Quad Cortex. I think people would have been big fans of. In other ways, you know, the UI I think is as advertised. You know, the touchscreen really does work as a touchscreen. And I think in terms of the tones that are in there, I think some of the tones you can get out of this thing are really great. The capture, really great as well. But, you know, in terms of do the delays in it, you know, stand up with a unit that was 20 years old? In some ways, not really. No, you don't get multi-tap delays in here. You don't get reverse delays in here. So it's, I don't know, not so much that it's anything that Neural DSP specifically have done wrong. It's just that I think there's been things for decades, you know, Yamaha Magicstomp, the Strymon timeline, that have been able to do these things that are kind of still ahead of most modelers, right? Except for like Fractal and to some extent Line 6 have, I think, caught up with some of this stuff. It's just a bit strange to me, you know. I guess it's a marketing thing, right? Is it? Or is it more than marketing? What do you think? Are these modeling devices getting significantly better? You know, people were using the pod on recordings, you know, years and years and years ago. And, you know, people weren't complaining back then. Is it a thing where essentially those things from back then would have been acceptable today? We have made, I think, big strides forward in terms of user interface and in terms of actual, you know, gigability of these things. You know, these things, I think, especially like the Helix, are super giggable and super, you know, easy to program, fully gigging presets, you know, multiple modes, foot switches and setting up presets with snapshots, all this kind of stuff that is just not even really thinkable on this, where you're just either you've got the preset on or off and you can go into other presets. You don't get trails between them and stuff like that. But, you know, you don't really get trails between presets on the Quad Cortex or the HX Stomp or these other things. So it's a bit of a, well, trails are a luxury then, aren't they? So, I don't know. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the Magicstomp and see if there's still some use in this thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are people too harsh on Neural, or do they have a point? As a case in point, here is the Yamaha Magicstomp. Now, this is a piece of gear that actually was used by Alan Holdsworth, I think, up until the point where he moved on to their next realm. Here's just a few kind of presets on here that I really think stand the test of time. The P80, this is rotary mod and delay. Just a beautiful lush thing. Has trails as well, right? Now, if we go through here, what I'm surprised by as well is there's even poly pitch shifting. Poly pitch shifting is not even a thing that every single modeler can do. Like the Pod Go can't do it yet. There are, you know, quite a lot of examples. The Hoton Ampero doesn't have amazing poly pitch shifting. So, like, even back then, Yamaha had a decent pitch shift, or relatively decent, considering, you know, I've heard worse things in today's things. The things that really kind of don't seem to sound great any longer, plate reverbs, or reverbs in general, especially as you turn up the time on these, you hear the kind of things. Quite like a lot of metallicness to them, and not necessarily in pleasing way if you kind of listen to. That one's not too bad actually. Also, you've got some of the things that Alan himself actually dialed in. Just, there's so much cool stuff. I think this is one of the famous effects from back in the day. Rich stereo chorus now. Just loads of really, really cool stuff in here, to be honest, and also quite a lot of junk, but, you know, some really cool things. Things that we could probably replicate. I think one area that I think has not really necessarily made huge leaps forward might be delay. No, these are as good, I think, as delays that I've heard elsewhere. And we've also got some things which you don't even have yet in the quad cortex, like some reverse delays. If I can find some reverb, I think is really the key area where we've made real improvements, because that's just like a bit of a ringing sound, not exactly pleasant. You know, we've even got big multi-tap delays. We've got reverse delay in here, which quad cortex doesn't have. you know, multi-taps, which quad cortex doesn't have. I think it'd be really cool to see some of these sounds recreated. I mean, if Yamaha or Line 6 even were able to get some of these algorithms, I just think there's so many cool sounds locked up in this type of box. You can't edit so much on the unit. I think this is where we've made real improvements. I think reverb is one area. To some extent, on some devices, the pitch effects I think are quite a bit better. But in terms of delay sounds overall, I think I picked this over the quad cortex. I think I picked this over certainly some of the algorithms here, like the multi-tap stuff. I think go a bit beyond what you can do in the Helix. I think, of course, Axe Effects can do most of what this can do. And if you have a really specialized kind of delay unit, then you could probably get there. Of course, I think also drive and amp tones, I think, have improved as time has gone on. The processing power has meant that we can oversample more, and then you get less aliasing and hopefully things which sound a bit more realistic. And then the key thing that I think has got really a lot better is the user experience and, you know, putting things together which are actually giggable. You know, Alan's rig was, I think, 6 of these or something like that when he was gigging them live, and now, of course, you could do all of the sorts of things that you could do with this with one Eventide H9 or something like that in theory, and you could get away with it. I just don't necessarily, I think there's a bunch of stuff in here which is kind of still quite underrated considering how far along we are since this came out and the sorts of things that some companies are still sort of wrestling with. This kind of been in here for almost decades, right? It's a bit of a crazy thing. And it had a PC editor as well, which I think most people, myself included, can't use anymore. The thing, if you can update the firmware on these, I think you can actually edit all of the parameters on the unit. I'm running a slightly older firmware on this, so you can't, but I kind of do feel like these kinds of devices, or maybe the Yamaha Magicstomp is the outlier, to be honest. Maybe it is because 32-bit processing, and it had certain things that it needed to be able to do for people like Alan Holdsworth to be able to use it. Maybe he was like the key person driving it forward so that you had these crazy kind of 8-tap delays where all of the taps were customizable. But it still seems to me that in terms of delay functionality and some of the modulation and stuff, this thing still rivals pretty much most things on the market in some kind of weird ways, and in terms of processing speed or depth and all that sort of stuff as well. 32-bit processor in there. Yeah, what do you reckon? Are we as far along as companies market to us that we are, or maybe things aren't moving quite as fast as we've been led to believe?